The first thing Clara asked about was the sugar bowl. Not how her mother had been, not whether the lunch counter was making enough to keep the rent paid, not whether the cough Ellen had carried through 2 winters had finally gone away. She stood just inside the door of Ward's lunch on a wet November evening in 1936, 4 years older than when Ellen had last seen her, and said, "Do you still have the white sugar bowl?" For a few seconds, Ellen could only stare. Outside, rain shone black on the Akron sidewalk. Across the street, the rubber plant's windows burned in long yellow rows, though fewer men were working nights than there had been before the hard years began. The factory whistle had sounded nearly an hour earlier. Ellen had already stacked the pie plates, wiped the counter twice, and turned 4 of the 6 stools upside down. She had been reaching for the last one when the bell over the door gave its thin little ring. And there was Clara. 27 now. Her hair was shorter. Her coat was good wool, though Ellen could see that the cuffs had been carefully turned to hide wear. A narrow brown suitcase stood by her ankle. She looked neither prosperous nor desperate, which somehow made it harder to understand why she had come. Ellen set the stool back on the floor. The sugar bowl was in the room above the lunch counter, wrapped in an old dish towel at the back of a cupboard. She had carried it through 2 moves and 1 sheriff's sale. She had kept it after selling the walnut dining table, Everett's radio, the parlor rug, and almost every respectable thing they had once owned. It was not even pretty. White china, a blue line around the rim, no matching lid. A crack ran down one side like a pale vein. "You came all this way to ask me that?" Clara looked past her toward the empty counter. "I came because I need to know." That was the kind of sentence a mother could live inside for years if she let herself. Ellen did not. She reached for the coffee pot instead. There had been a time when she would have crossed the room and taken Clara's face between both hands. There had been another time when she would have demanded an explanation before the girl had removed her coat. 4 years changed a woman. So did burying a husband. So did learning what people would pay for ham when they could afford ham, egg sandwiches when they could afford eggs, and coffee when all they wanted was a warm place to sit for 10 minutes before going home to tell their wives there had been no work again. "Coffee?" Ellen asked. Clara's mouth moved as though the question had surprised her. "Yes." Ellen poured a cup. She did not ask how Clara took it. Clara had always used 1 spoonful of sugar. As a child, she used 2 and stirred until the spoon rang against the cup. At 17, when she began insisting she was grown, she reduced it to 1. Ellen slid the sugar dispenser toward her. Clara did not touch it. That hurt more than it should have. She removed her gloves 1 finger at a time and sat on the stool nearest the cash register. For several moments they listened to the rain. 4 years. Ellen had imagined this meeting so many times that the real thing seemed poorly arranged. In some versions, Clara ran into the house crying. In others, Ellen was the one who refused to speak. Sometimes Everett was still alive, standing between them with his jaw set, waiting for Ellen to choose a side. Those versions had all become impossible. Everett Ward had been dead for 21 months. He had died in a charity ward, with a sheet pulled neatly to his chest and his wedding band hanging loose around a hand that had once seemed large enough to control every room he entered. Clara had not come to the funeral. Ellen had mailed the notice to the last Chicago address she had. No answer came. For weeks afterward, she had told herself the letter had been lost. It was easier than admitting her daughter might have received it and stayed away. Clara finally wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I heard about Daddy." Ellen kept folding a dish towel. "Did you?" "Aunt Mabel found my address." That made sense. Mabel could find a woman in China if she believed there was family business to discuss. "She wrote last spring." "And you couldn't write back?" Clara lowered her eyes. There it was, the old rhythm. 1 sentence from Ellen, 1 silence from Clara, and suddenly the years between them collapsed. The lunch counter disappeared. Ellen was back in the yellow kitchen on Cross Street, Everett at the head of the table, Clara standing by the sink with a cheap suitcase at her feet. Ellen stopped folding. She laid the towel flat. "No," she said, "we're not doing it that way." Clara looked up. Ellen surprised herself as much as her daughter. 4 years earlier, she had spent the entire last conversation answering questions she had not been allowed to finish. Why hadn't she spoken? Why did she always take Everett's side? Why did keeping the peace matter more than keeping her daughter? Why had Ellen stood at that kitchen table like a piece of furniture while Clara packed? Those questions had followed Ellen into every room she occupied afterward. She had answered them 1,000 times while washing dishes, never once where Clara could hear. "If you came to fight with a dead man," Ellen said, You've missed him. Clara's face tightened. I didn't. Then drink your coffee. For one dangerous second, Ellen thought Clara might pick up her suitcase and leave. Instead, she drank. Ellen turned away so her daughter would not see the relief in her face. She wiped the grill, though it was already clean. Ward's lunch was narrow enough for Ellen to touch both the pie case and the back counter if she stretched her arms. There were 6 stools, 2 small tables, a black stove that heated unevenly, and a refrigerator she had bought used from a drugstore that closed in 1935. It was not what anyone in the Ward family had imagined for her. Once, Ellen had entertained 12 people on Christmas Day and worried whether the good spoons had been polished properly. Now she served stew to tire builders and fried potatoes for streetcar conductors. Mabel called the place "your little counter," in the same voice she once used for Clara's paper dolls. But the little counter paid its rent. It paid for the room upstairs. It paid the grocer every Saturday. And unlike many promises Ellen had trusted in her life, the cash drawer never pretended to contain more than it did. She had come to respect that. Clara looked around slowly. You own this? I owe Mr. Lasker 3 months on the equipment. That isn't what I asked. Ellen glanced at her. Yes, it's mine. Something changed in Clara's expression. Not pride exactly, maybe surprise. That stung too. Your father thought it was temporary, Ellen said. Clara looked down at her coffee again. When did you start? 2 years ago. Before he died? 7 months before. Clara seemed to think about that. Ellen knew what she was seeing. Her mother in an apron, her father alive somewhere else. A woman earning money under her own name while Everett Ward still breathed. That would not have fit easily into the family history Clara had taken with her to Chicago. Ellen poured herself the remains of the coffee and leaned against the back counter. The rain softened. From farther down Market Street came the clatter of someone dragging metal shutters across a storefront. So, Ellen said, the sugar bowl. Clara looked at her. You really kept it? I kept a great many foolish things. Where is it? Upstairs. I need to see it. Why? Clara hesitated. That hesitation frightened Ellen more than if the girl had shouted. You remember when it cracked? Of course Ellen remembered. Summer of 1932, the year Everett lost his position as floor supervisor. The year he began coming home at 3 in the afternoon and telling everyone the plant had shortened shifts, as though the shortened shifts were a temporary inconvenience instead of the beginning of their fall. Clara had been 22. She wanted to leave Akron. There had been a young man named Peter Dugan who talked about Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, anywhere that sounded larger than Cross Street, and a father who listened through walls. Ellen had disliked Peter. Everett had hated him. One Thursday evening there had been an argument. A chair tipped over. The sugar bowl struck the kitchen floor. Clara left the house 2 days later. Ellen had not seen her since. Yes, Ellen said. Clara studied her mother's face. Tell me how. Ellen felt the room go very still. Even the factory seemed quieter across the street. It fell. That's what you said then. It was 5 years ago. 4. Ellen said nothing. Clara's voice remained calm. That was worse. 4 years and 3 months. Ellen looked toward the window. She had discovered during the Depression that there were different kinds of hunger. The easiest one was the kind that could be solved with potatoes. Another came when a woman stood in a grocery aisle calculating whether soap could wait until Friday. Another sat beside a hospital bed and watched a man who had once filled a house become smaller under a blanket. And then there was the hunger that had no decent name. The hunger to hear your child enter a room after you had taught yourself not to expect the sound. Ellen had spent 4 years learning to live with that one. Now Clara was sitting 6 feet away, and instead of relief, Ellen felt the old fear pressing at the base of her throat. She picked up the coffee pot again, empty. There was comfort in an empty thing. Nothing hidden, nothing left to measure. Why does it matter how a dish broke? Clara reached into her handbag. She removed a folded envelope, worn soft along the edges. Not a letter. At least Ellen did not think so. Clara laid it on the counter but kept one hand over it. In Chicago, she said, I worked at Marshall Field's for 11 months. Then they cut people. After that, I did office work when I could get it. I typed invoices for a plumbing supplier. I addressed envelopes for a mail order company. Last winter I kept books 3 evenings a week for a woman who sold dresses out of her front room." Ellen listened. She wanted to ask whether Clara had been warm enough, whether she had eaten, whether Peter Dugan had gone with her, whether she had ever been ill with nobody there to bring water. A mother could have 100 questions and still choose the wrong one. "So you managed," Ellen said. Clara gave a short laugh. It contained no amusement. "That's what you want to know?" "No." "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Ellen folded her arms. "I want to know why my daughter disappeared for 4 years and walked into my place of business asking about a broken sugar bowl." Clara pulled her hand from the envelope. On the front was Ellen's name. Not Mrs. Everett Ward, not Mrs. Ward, Ellen Ward. The handwriting was familiar. Her stomach tightened before her mind identified it. Everett's. "You've seen his writing," Ellen said. "Yes." "Where did you get that?" "From a man named Raymond Bell." The name meant nothing to Ellen. "He worked with Daddy?" Clara shook her head. "At the Hamilton Hotel." Ellen stared at her. For a moment, the lunch counter seemed to tilt. The Hamilton stood downtown, 12 blocks away. In better years, it had hosted wedding dinners, traveling salesmen, businessmen from Cleveland, and families who wanted to pretend for one evening that money was not something respectable people discussed. Ellen had not entered the building since 1932. She had spent 8 months there, not as a guest. Clara watched her. "You know the hotel?" "Yes." "Mr. Bell was the night clerk for almost 20 years. Ellen remembered him now, a narrow man with rimless spectacles who kept his cuffs protected by black sleeve garters. He used to eat an apple at 2 in the morning and leave the peel in one long coil on a saucer. She had not thought of him in years. "What does he want?" "Nothing." "Then why does he have a letter from your father?" "He said Daddy left it with him." Ellen felt cold despite the stove. "Your father never stayed at the Hamilton." Clara's eyes did not leave hers. "No," she said, "but you worked there." The sentence was quiet. Ellen wished it had been louder. Something loud could be fought. She looked toward the door. The sign still read "Open." She crossed the room, turned it to "Closed," and pulled the shade halfway down. When she turned back, Clara had not moved. "You knew," Ellen said. "I know now." "How?" "Mr. Bell saw Aunt Mabel's notice about Daddy. He recognized the name. It took him months to find me." "That doesn't make sense." "He wasn't looking for you." Ellen's mouth went dry. "He was looking for me." There were things Ellen had done during those 8 months at the Hamilton that she had never told Clara. There were things she had never told Everett. There were things Everett knew anyway. She walked behind the counter and gripped its edge. The memory returned with humiliating clarity. White sheets, steam, her hands cracked red from soap, a basement laundry hot enough in January to make a woman sweat through her dress. She had gone in through the service entrance at 11 at night after telling Clara she was helping Mabel with sewing. At 6 in the morning, she came home, washed her face, put oatmeal on the stove, and behaved as though respectable women did not spend the night sorting other people's dirty linen for 14 cents an hour. Everett had been out of work. He called the hotel job degrading. He also accepted the grocery money. For 8 months, neither of them said aloud where it came from. Then Everett found work again. Ellen quit. And the family agreed, without ever formally agreeing, to forget. Clara leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That you were working nights." "You were young." "I was 22. "You were leaving." "I hadn't left yet." Ellen's fingers tightened on the counter. This was how it happened. Not with shouting, never at first. A family could walk toward its worst night in perfectly ordinary sentences. "You had enough on your mind." Clara looked almost angry now. "I thought Daddy was keeping us." "He was your father." "That isn't an answer." "No, it's the answer you had at the time." "Because you gave it to me." Ellen turned away. She began stacking clean glasses. 1, 2, 3. Clara pushed the envelope across the counter. "He wrote this the night before I left." Ellen stopped. Rain tapped lightly against the window. Somewhere in the back of the building, a pipe knocked once, then again. "I don't know what it says," Clara continued. "It's still sealed." Ellen looked over her shoulder. The envelope lay between them, her name on the front, Everett's handwriting, a date in the upper corner, August 14th, 1932. Ellen knew that date. She knew what Clara had worn that evening. She knew what supper had burned because nobody remembered to turn off the pan. She knew where Everett had been standing when the sugar bowl broke, and she knew, with sudden certainty, that whatever was inside that envelope had not been written for the woman she had become. It had been written for the woman who stood in that kitchen 4 years earlier and made the worst decision of her life. Clara touched the edge of the envelope. "Before you open it," she said, "I want to see the bowl." Ellen did not move. "Why?" "Because Mr. Bell told me something else." "What?" For the first time since entering the lunch counter, Clara's composure broke. Only slightly. Her lower lip trembled once before she pressed it still. "He said the night you came to work after I left, your dress was torn at the shoulder." Ellen felt every sound in the room disappear. Clara continued. "And there was blood on your sleeve." Ellen stared at her daughter. 4 years vanished. The counter vanished. The factory lights vanished. She could smell burned onions. She could hear the kitchen chair scrape across the floor. She could see white china tumbling from someone's hand. And suddenly she was not 48 years old and standing inside a business with her own name painted on the window. She was back in the house on Cross Street. Everett was alive. Clara was crying. The sugar bowl had just struck the floor, and Ellen was about to tell the lie that would cost her 4 years with her daughter. Ellen climbed the narrow stairs with Clara behind her. The room above Ward's lunch had once belonged to a barber and his wife. It was hardly more than a bedroom with a hot plate, a sink, and one window overlooking the alley, but Ellen had made it orderly. A chenille spread covered the iron bed. 2 dresses hung behind a curtain. A small mirror rested on the washstand. On the sill she kept a pot of rosemary that had survived 3 winters by stubbornness alone. She went to the cupboard. For a moment she stood with her hand on the handle. Clara did not rush her. That, more than anything, made Ellen open it. She moved aside a tin of oatmeal, a jar of coffee, and a stack of saucers. At the back was the dish towel. She carried the bundle to the table. Clara came closer. Ellen unfolded the cloth. The sugar bowl looked smaller than either of them remembered. Its missing lid made it seem unfinished. The old crack had yellowed faintly. Along the lower curve, almost hidden by the blue line, there was a second repaired break where 3 pieces had once separated completely. Clara touched the rim. "You glued it." "Twice." "I only remember 1 crack," Ellen sat. "The second happened later." "When?" "The morning after you left." Clara looked at her. Ellen could have told the story neatly. She had practiced neatness all her life. She could have arranged the facts into respectable order. Hardship, misunderstanding, pride, regret. She could have spoken about Everett's temper as though it had been weather and about her own silence as though silence were something that merely happened to women of her generation. But Clara had not come back for a respectable story. So Ellen started with the money. There were $43 in that bowl. Clara blinked. "What money?" "Yours, mostly, or meant for you." Ellen watched her daughter's face change. 4 years earlier, Clara had been saving for a commercial course in Chicago. She could type, but not fast enough for the better office jobs. She had clipped advertisements from newspapers and written to 3 schools for rates. One sent a brochure with women in white blouses seated at rows of typewriters, all of them looking as though nobody had ever told them what a daughter owed her family. Clara had saved from her work at Klein's dry goods store. Then Klein's reduced hours. Then Everett lost his position. Then the electric bill came due. The savings disappeared so gradually Clara did not understand what had happened until most of it was gone. "I thought Daddy used it," Clara said. "He did." Clara stared at her. Ellen folded her hands. "Some of it, not all." "You told me you had." "Yes." "Why?" The old answer rose automatically. "Because he was your father." Ellen swallowed it. "Because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." Clara stepped away from the table. Afraid of him? Afraid of everything. She told her about February 1932, when Everett came home at noon carrying his lunch pail, though Ellen had packed enough for a full shift. His plant had let another group go. Not shortened hours, not temporary reassignment. Finished. He sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour without taking off his coat. At first he kept saying the foreman would call him back. After 2 weeks, he stopped saying it. After 6 weeks, he stopped leaving the house before breakfast. Clara had been bringing home $6 and change in a good week from the dry goods store. Ellen was earning less at the Hamilton because the laundry superintendent had cut the women's hours. Rent, coal, food, Everett's medicine for his stomach, and one overdue note consumed everything. Then came the county tax bill on the small house. It was not an enormous amount. That was the cruelty of those years. A family could be brought to its knees by sums that once would have been annoying rather than impossible. Everett found Clara's envelope. He said he'd replace it in 2 weeks, Ellen said. Did you believe him? I wanted to. That isn't what I asked. Ellen looked at her daughter. No. Clara turned toward the window. The alley below shone with rainwater. A delivery truck passed at the far end, its tires making a soft rushing sound. How much did he take? $29. Clara closed her eyes. I thought it was 38. The rest was mine. Clara turned back. Ellen explained. For months, she had hidden part of her hotel wages inside the sugar bowl beneath a folded square of wax paper. Not much, 50 cents here, $1 there. Anything she could keep after groceries without Everett noticing. She told herself it was for emergencies. By spring, she knew it was for Clara. Not because she approved of Peter Dugan, she still did not. But she understood that her daughter needed to leave the house before the house taught her to become small. You were going to give me money? Clara asked. Yes. When? I don't know. That sounds like you. Ellen accepted that. The hardest truths were often insulting in their accuracy. I kept waiting for a better moment. There wasn't one. No. There had never been a better moment. There had only been the last one. August 14th had been hot even for Ohio. Ellen had worked the previous night and slept less than 2 hours. Everett spent the morning visiting 2 plants and returned angry at noon. Clara came home at 6 with news that Peter knew a man in Chicago who could get her work entering invoices for a wholesale company. She wanted to leave Saturday. Everett said no. Clara said she was 22. Everett said age did not make foolishness respectable. Clara said she was tired of asking permission to breathe. Ellen remembered every sentence because she had spent 4 years wishing she had interrupted sooner. The argument moved from the table to the sink and back again. Then Clara opened the cupboard and reached for the sugar bowl. She had learned about Ellen's hiding place that morning from Mabel, who had mentioned it accidentally. Clara expected to find enough to leave. Instead, she found $14. 14, Clara whispered now. Yes. I remember. She had counted it twice. Then she asked where the rest had gone. Everett said nothing. Ellen looked at him. And that look was enough. Clara understood there had been more. She demanded an answer. Everett began to say the money had been needed for the house. Then he stopped. He looked at Ellen. Ellen knew what he wanted. He wanted her to make the loss smaller. He wanted her to turn theft into housekeeping. He wanted her to preserve the picture of a father who still provided. So Ellen said she had used the money. Clara had stared at her as though she had slapped her. You said you needed it for bills, Clara remembered. Yes. And I asked whether you were sorry. Yes. You said families didn't keep accounts with each other. Ellen looked down. I remember. Clara laughed once, bitterly. I hated that sentence. So did I, eventually. What happened next? You know. No, I know what I saw. That distinction had been waiting 4 years to be made. Ellen breathed slowly. Clara announced that she would leave anyway. She went upstairs to pack. Everett followed. Ellen stayed in the kitchen for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she heard Clara shout. When she reached the hall, Everett had Clara's suitcase. He was not striking her. Ellen wanted that understood. He was holding the suitcase and refusing to give it back. But his face frightened Ellen. Not because he looked monstrous, because he looked humiliated. Humiliation had become the most dangerous thing in their house. A man could survive hunger more easily than the belief that his wife and daughter had seen him fail. Clara grabbed one handle. Everett held the other. The cheap case tore. A blouse, 2 stockings, and a hairbrush fell onto the floor. Clara began to cry. Everett told her she would not leave under his roof for another man. Clara said it was not his roof if he could not pay for it. Ellen saw the sentence hit him. Before he could answer, she stepped between them. She told Clara to pick up her things. Everett said Ellen had no say. That was when Ellen reached for the sugar bowl. Not as a weapon, she wanted the $14 inside it. She wanted to put the money in Clara's hand. Everett caught her wrist. The bowl slipped. It struck the edge of the table and broke. One piece sliced through the shoulder of Ellen's dress when she turned. Clara gasped. Everett let go. Blood ran down Ellen's upper arm. Only a little, enough to frighten all three of them. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Ellen did something she had never done in 26 years of marriage. She told Everett to get out of the kitchen. He laughed, Ellen said. Clara's eyes filled. I remember that. He thought I'd calm down. But you didn't. No. Ellen had picked up the largest piece of the broken bowl, not threateningly, simply because it was there. She held it in one hand and looked at Everett. Then she told him that if he touched Clara's suitcase again, Ellen would leave with her. Everett stopped laughing. Clara had not heard that part. She was upstairs collecting her clothes. I came back down and you told me to go, Clara said. Yes. You said if I wanted Chicago so badly, I should go and stop punishing everyone for staying. Ellen closed her eyes. Those words had survived perfectly. Yes. Why would you say that? Because your father was standing in the hall. Clara's face hardened. So you were protecting him again? No. The word came sharp enough to surprise them both. Ellen opened her eyes. I was protecting you from having to choose whether to stay for me. Clara shook her head. That makes no sense. It didn't then either. Ellen stood and went to the cupboard again. From the highest shelf, she took an old tobacco tin. It had belonged to Everett, though he had stopped smoking before Clara was born. Inside were 2 receipts, a hotel pay envelope, and a small cardboard train ticket stub faded nearly gray. Ellen laid them on the table. Clara touched the stub. Akron to Chicago, August 16th, 1932. Her departure date. I bought your ticket, Ellen said. Clara looked up slowly. No. Yes. Peter bought it. Peter didn't have the money. He told me. He told you a great many things. Clara looked again at the ticket. Ellen remembered that night. She had wrapped her shoulder in a strip torn from an old petticoat and gone to the Hamilton for her shift. Raymond Bell saw the blood and asked what happened. She lied at first. Then she cried in the service hallway beside a stack of fresh towels. She had been ashamed of the crying for years. Now it seemed like the least shameful thing she had done. Bell loaned her $3 against the next week's wages. The laundry supervisor advanced another $2. Ellen added everything left in the broken sugar bowl. At dawn she bought Clara a ticket and left it at the station under her daughter's name. How did you know I was still going? Clara asked. Because you were my daughter. That almost made Clara smile. Almost. I thought Peter arranged it, she said. I know. How? You wrote Mabel once. She told me. Clara's fingers tightened around the ticket. Then why didn't you tell me? Ellen looked at the old bowl. Because Everett asked her not to. Because she was angry. Because she was ashamed Clara had gone. Because 1 week became 1 month, and 1 month became a year. Because Clara's first postcard said she was fine and did not include an address. Because by the time Mabel found one, Ellen had convinced herself that writing would only reopen the wound. Because pride was not a single bad decision, it was a habit. A woman practiced it until it became indistinguishable from survival. I don't have one answer, she said. Clara looked disappointed. Ellen forced herself to continue. I was angry that you left, relieved that you left, terrified you would fail, terrified you would succeed and never need us again, ashamed of what happened, ashamed that I had let your father use your money, ashamed that I had spent years making his pride the largest thing in our house. Clara said nothing. And after a while, Ellen said, I thought you had decided what kind of mother I was. I didn't know how to ask you to reconsider. The room was quiet. Clara stared at the ticket for a long time. Then she pushed Everett's unopened letter toward Ellen. Open it. Ellen did not want to. The dead had an unfair advantage in family quarrels. They could not be interrupted. They could not be made to explain themselves better. They left behind words that hardened simply because there would be no more. Still, Ellen broke the seal. The paper inside was thin hotel stationery. Everett's handwriting wandered downhill toward the right margin. He had written only 1 page. Ellen read silently. Halfway down, her hand began to shake. Clara watched her. What does it say? Ellen finished before answering. Everett had gone to the Hamilton after the argument. He knew Ellen would be working. He intended to bring her home. Instead, Belle stopped him in the lobby and told him Ellen had bought Clara's train ticket. Everett did not confront her. He sat in a chair near the elevators for almost 2 hours. Then he asked for hotel paper. The letter was not an apology. Not exactly. That would have been easier. Everett wrote that he had taken Clara's savings. He wrote that Ellen had lied for him. He wrote that when the bowl broke, he understood for the first time that his wife was more afraid of his shame than of being poor. And then came the sentence Ellen read 3 times. I have made being needed the same thing as being obeyed, and I do not know how to undo that in one night. Ellen covered her mouth. Clara waited. There was more. Everett wrote that he had intended to tell Clara the truth himself before her train left, but he had gone to the station, seen her standing with her suitcase, and lost his nerve. He watched from the far end of the platform while Clara boarded. He did not speak. He told himself he would write the next week. He never did. At the bottom, he asked Ellen not to forgive him yet. First, he wrote, she should stop doing the forgiving for everybody else. Ellen lowered the letter. She had not known. For 4 years she had imagined Everett certain of himself to the end. She had built anger around that certainty. Now he had reached across time and complicated even that. Clara's voice was soft. Did he say why Mr. Bell had it? Ellen nodded. He asked Bell to keep it until he had told you himself. But he never did. No. So Bell kept it 4 years? Yes. Clara looked toward the window. What a ridiculous family. Ellen almost laughed. Instead, a sound escaped her that was half laugh, half sob. Clara looked back. For the first time that evening, they saw the same thing at the same time. Not a villain. Not a martyr. A family full of people who had mistaken silence for protection until silence became the thing that harmed them most. Clara reached for the sugar bowl. Her fingertip followed the repaired seam. You said it broke twice. Ellen nodded. The first time that night, the second the next morning. How? I threw it. Clara stared. Ellen finally smiled. It felt strange on her face. After I bought your ticket, I came home. Your father was asleep in the chair. I cleaned the kitchen. I found the biggest pieces and tried to fit them together. Then I got angry. So you threw it? At the wall. Clara began to laugh, quietly at first, then harder. Ellen looked offended for perhaps 2 seconds before she laughed too. The sound filled the little room. It was not reconciliation. It was not forgiveness. But it was the first thing they had shared in 4 years that did not belong to Everett. When the laughter faded, Clara wiped beneath one eye. Why did you fix it after that? Ellen looked at the bowl. Because I was tired of throwing away things just because they were damaged. Clara became still. Neither of them said what else that sentence might mean. Below them, someone tried the locked door of Ward's lunch. A man's voice called Ellen's name. She glanced at the clock. Nearly 9. I forgot, she said. Forgot what? Mr. Harlan. Clara raised an eyebrow. Who is Mr. Harlan? No one. The answer came too quickly. Clara noticed. Ellen resented that immediately. She went downstairs. A moment later, Clara followed. Outside stood George Harlan, a widower in his early 50s who delivered bread before dawn and ate supper at Ward's lunch 3 evenings a week. He wore the same brown cap in every season and had the patient expression of a man accustomed to machinery that did not work the first time. Ellen opened the door. You're closed, he said. Yes. I can read. Then why did you try the door? Because you asked me to look at the back hinge tonight. Ellen had forgotten entirely. The kitchen door had been dragging against the floor for 2 weeks. George lifted a small toolbox. I can come tomorrow. Clara was standing behind Ellen now. George saw her and removed his cap. Ellen suddenly felt 16 years old, which annoyed her more than anything else that had happened all evening. This is my daughter, Clara. George's expression changed. He knew Ellen had a daughter. Everyone who ate regularly at Ward's lunch knew. They also knew not to ask. Good evening, he said. Clara nodded. George looked at Ellen again. Tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow. He started to leave, then paused. You ate? Ellen frowned. What? You always forget when you close late. I own a lunch counter. That wasn't my question. Clara's eyes moved between them. Ellen could feel it. I ate. George did not believe her. He knew better than to argue. Tomorrow, then. He put on his cap and walked away through the wet street. Ellen closed the door. Behind her, Clara said nothing. That silence was intolerable. He delivers bread. I didn't ask. He has a daughter in Cincinnati. I still didn't ask. His wife died 6 years ago. Clara leaned against the counter. Mother. Ellen turned. Clara was smiling, not kindly enough. Don't. I haven't said anything. You're 27 years old and you still make that face. What face? That one. Clara's smile softened, and Ellen realized with a small shock that she remembered this too. Not the woman from Chicago, her girl, the one who could make an entire accusation with one eyebrow. The ache came suddenly. Ellen turned toward the grill before Clara saw it. Your coffee is cold, she said. I know. I can make more. Clara looked at her suitcase. I was going to stay at Aunt Mabel's. Ellen waited. But I haven't told her I'm here yet. Still, Ellen waited. Clara looked toward the stairs. Do you have room? Ellen's first answer rose from habit. The room is small. The bed is narrow. You'll be uncomfortable. Mabel has a spare room. All the polished ways of saying no before anyone could discover how badly she wanted to say yes. She thought of Everett's letter. Stop doing the forgiving for everybody else. Maybe there were other things she could stop doing too. There's room, Ellen said. It was the simplest sentence she had spoken all night. Clara nodded. Then she carried her suitcase upstairs. Clara slept in Ellen's bed. Ellen took the narrow cot she kept folded behind the curtain for the rare nights Mabel stayed over after helping with inventory. Neither woman argued about it. Both were too tired to perform generosity. But sleep did not come easily. Ellen lay in the dark listening to Clara breathe 3 feet away. For years, she had imagined her daughter sleeping in rooms she could not picture. Chicago boarding houses, furnished rooms above stores, a cheap apartment with a noisy radiator, perhaps a room shared with another girl. Perhaps, for all Ellen knew, a fine place with an elevator and a doorman. Now Clara was close enough that Ellen could hear her turn on the mattress. At 2:30, Clara whispered, Are you awake? Yes. Did you ever come to Chicago? Ellen stared at the ceiling. No. Why not? Because I didn't know where you were. Aunt Mabel did. Not at first. And later? Ellen said nothing. Clara did not press. That was almost worse. After a while, Ellen heard her turn again. Then Clara said, Peter didn't come with me. Ellen's eyes opened wider in the dark. She had wondered for 4 years and never let herself ask Mabel directly. What happened? He said he would meet me in Chicago the week after I arrived. And? He didn't. Ellen waited. 2 months later, I heard from his sister. He'd gone to Toledo with a friend. Said there was factory work there. Was there? I don't know. Clara's voice held no heartbreak now. Whatever pain Peter Dugan had caused had been worn smooth by time. I hated you for being right about him, she said. Ellen almost answered that she had known. She stopped herself. There were victories no mother should collect. I'm sorry, she said instead. Clara gave a small sound that might have been surprise. Then they were quiet again. Near dawn, Ellen slept. When she woke, Clara was gone. For one terrible second, Ellen was back in 1932. She sat upright so fast the cot springs complained. Then she smelled coffee. Downstairs, Clara stood behind the counter wearing one of Ellen's spare aprons. George Harlan sat on the second stool eating toast. Ellen stopped halfway down the stairs. Clara looked up. Your breadman let himself in. I have a key, George said. You do not. You leave the back window unlatched. That is not better. George lifted his coffee cup. Morning. Ellen looked at Clara. Why are you behind my counter? Because 3 men were waiting outside when I came down. You served them? I can pour coffee. She can make toast, too, George said. Clara smiled. Ellen felt outnumbered in her own business before 7 in the morning. It was not an unpleasant feeling. She tied on her apron. The breakfast rush arrived in waves. Men from the plant, 2 telephone company linemen, a woman who cleaned offices downtown, a young father with a little boy who shared 1 plate of fried potatoes and asked for extra ketchup. Clara moved awkwardly at first. She put spoons on the wrong side of saucers, overfilled coffee, and once handed a man his check before he had finished eating. But she learned quickly. By 9, Ellen could turn to the stove without worrying that the girl would drop a cup or forget who had ordered eggs. By 10, Clara had found a pencil and begun adding columns in the sales ledger between customers. Ellen noticed. She said nothing. At 10:30, Clara frowned. "Mother," Ellen was slicing onions. "What? How much do you charge for coffee?" 5 cents. "How much does it cost you?" "That depends." "On what?" "Coffee." Clara stared. Ellen continued slicing. "Very helpful. I know what I spend. You don't write it down." "I have it here." Ellen tapped her temple with the knife handle. Clara's expression became exactly the one she had used at 16 when Everett tried to explain why a household did not need to know the price of everything individually. "Your memory is not bookkeeping. It has worked for 2 years. You owe a man named Lasker $68.40. Ellen stopped cutting. "How do you know that?" "There are invoices under the cash drawer." "You had no business reading those." "I was looking for receipt paper." "You found it?" "Yes." "Then stop looking." Clara closed the ledger. The air between them changed. George, who had been kneeling by the back hinge, quietly gathered his screwdriver and moved outside without saying goodbye. Ellen resented him for being sensible enough to leave. Clara untied the apron. "You're right," Ellen blinked. "I am?" "It isn't my business." Clara hung the apron on a hook. That should have ended the matter. Instead, Ellen felt a sharp, foolish disappointment. "Where are you going?" "To Aunt Mabel's." "You haven't eaten." "I had toast. That was at 6:30. "I'm 27, Mother." There it was again. The phrase that had once sounded like defiance now sounded merely true. Ellen put down the knife. "Clara." Her daughter stopped at the door. Ellen hated apologies when they were demanded. This one had not been. "That ledger is a mess," she said. Clara turned. "I know. And I do owe Lasker $68.40. I know that too. I can pay him." "I didn't say you couldn't." "Not all at once." Clara waited. Ellen wiped her hands on the apron. "If you want to look at the books, you may." Clara's face softened only slightly. "I don't want to take over." "I didn't ask you to." "Good. Good." Neither moved. Then Clara reached for the apron again. "Where do you keep the flour invoices?" Ellen pointed toward the shelf. It was the first work they did together. Not forgiveness, not even peace. Columns, receipts, coffee costs, butter, bread, coal. Eggs, whose price changed often enough to make Ellen complain aloud. Clara built order from the scraps Ellen had kept in boxes and drawers. She made a page for each supplier. She counted what was due and what was promised. She showed Ellen that the lunch counter made more money in the first 2 hours of the day than from 2 until 5, when Ellen stayed open mostly because she hated turning away the 3 old men who came for coffee. "I can't close in the afternoon," Ellen said. "Why?" "Mr. Reese comes at 3. "Who is Mr. Reese?" "The man who sits there." "That is not a business reason." "He lost his wife." Clara looked at her. Ellen heard herself. "I charge him for coffee." "Does he pay?" "Eventually." Clara wrote something in the margin. "What did you write?" "Nothing." "Let me see." "No." Ellen reached for the ledger. Clara pulled it away, laughing. For perhaps 5 seconds, they were mother and daughter without history. Then the bell rang. Aunt Mabel entered carrying a pie. She stopped so abruptly the pie tilted. Clara stood behind the counter with Ellen's ledger in her hands. Mabel looked at Ellen, then at Clara, then back at Ellen. "Well," she said. It was one word, but Mabel had trained it for 40 years. It could mean surprise, accusation, triumph, disappointment, or the beginning of a sermon. This time it meant all 5. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said to Clara. "I didn't know if I would." "And you didn't tell me she came," Mabel said to Ellen. "She arrived last night. Telephones exist." I know. People use them to interrupt supper. Mabel set the pie down harder than necessary. She was 51, 3 years older than Ellen, and had spent most of their lives acting as though those 3 years constituted formal authority. She took off her gloves. Does Howard know? Know what? Clara asked. That you're here. Why would Uncle Howard need to know before I do? Mabel opened her mouth, closed it. Ellen almost smiled. Clara had always been good for her sister. They sat at one of the tables after the lunch rush. Mabel cut the pie she had brought as though she were punishing it. For 10 minutes they spoke about harmless things. Chicago weather, Howard's bad knee, the price of apples, a cousin in Canton whose husband had found steady work again. Then Mabel said, "So Raymond Bell found you." Ellen's fork stopped. Clara looked at her aunt. "You knew?" Mabel did not answer quickly enough. Clara sat back. "You knew." "I knew he was trying to find you." "Why didn't you tell Mother?" Mabel looked at Ellen. "Because your mother had enough grief." Ellen felt something inside her go cold. There it was, the family sentence, the same old excuse in another mouth. She set down her fork. "No." Mabel frowned. "What?" "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Decide what I can bear and call it kindness." Mabel stared at her. Clara did too. Ellen was suddenly tired of every person she loved appointing themselves guardian of every other person's pain. "Raymond had a letter from my husband addressed to me," she said. "You knew he was looking for Clara. You could have told me. You and Everett were in no state. Everett was dead by then. Not when Raymond first wrote me." Ellen went still. "When was that?" Mabel looked down. "Late 1934. Nearly a year before Everett died." Ellen felt betrayed in a way that was almost absurd. What difference could a year make after 4? All the difference. "Why?" she asked. Mabel's shoulders sagged. "Because Everett asked me not to." Clara stood. The chair scraped sharply. "You too?" Mabel looked stricken. "He came to see me. He said he was trying to put things right himself." "And you believed him?" Clara asked. "I had known him 26 years. So had Mother. That is exactly why I believed he should have the chance." Clara laughed without humor. "Mabel," Ellen said quietly, "what else?" Her sister looked at her. "What do you mean? What else did you decide not to tell us?" The pie sat between them. No one touched it. Mabel removed her glasses and polished them with the corner of her napkin. Ellen knew the gesture. Her sister only cleaned her glasses when she needed time. "Clara," Mabel said, "the money I sent you in Chicago the first year wasn't mine." Clara did not understand at first. Then she looked at Ellen. Ellen closed her eyes. Of all the things to come out now. "You told me it was from you," Clara said. "I said I was sending it." "That is the same thing." Mabel looked miserable. "Your mother gave it to me." Clara's face changed. The first money order had been $3, then 2, then 4 at Christmas. Never enough to rescue anyone. Enough for coal. Enough for stockings for work. Enough to eat for several days when Clara lost the department store job. She had written Mabel brief thank you notes, never Ellen. "How long?" Clara asked. Ellen answered, 18 months. "How?" "I worked." "At the hotel?" "No, by then I was taking laundry at home, and I cleaned 2 offices on Sundays." Clara stared at her. Everett had found occasional work by then, enough to keep them barely afloat. He did not know Ellen sent money, or perhaps he did and chose not to say. With Everett dead, there would always be questions no one could answer. Clara turned to Mabel. "Why put your name on it?" "Because your mother asked me to." Clara looked back at Ellen. "Why?" Ellen had believed she was doing the right thing. At the time, it had seemed almost noble. Clara was angry. Clara did not want contact. If the money came from Mabel, she might accept it. If it came from Ellen, perhaps pride would send it back. So Ellen arranged generosity in a form that required no relationship. Now, spoken aloud, it sounded less noble. "I wanted to help without making you answer me." Clara's eyes filled. "You always do that." "Do what?" "You love people where they can't see you." The sentence landed harder than accusation. Ellen looked away. Clara pushed her chair back. "I need air." She left the lunch counter without her coat. Ellen stood to follow. Mabel caught her wrist. "Give her a minute." Ellen pulled free. No. Mabel blinked. She has had 4 years of minutes. Ellen took Clara's coat from the hook and went outside. She found her daughter halfway down the block beneath the awning of a closed shoe store. Rain had stopped, but water dripped steadily from the canvas edge. Ellen held out the coat. Clara took it. They stood without speaking. After a while, Clara said, "Do you know what I told people about you?" Ellen did not want to know. "Yes," she said anyway. "I said you were weak." Ellen nodded. "I said Daddy decided everything and you let him." "That was sometimes true." "I said you cared more about what neighbors thought than about me." "That was sometimes true too." Clara looked at her sharply. "Stop agreeing. I'm not going to lie simply because you came home." That silenced her. Ellen leaned against the brick wall. "Clara, buying your ticket doesn't erase what I did before it. Sending money doesn't erase that I never told you the truth. Working nights doesn't make me brave in every room." Clara's chin trembled. "I don't know what to do with you if you aren't who I thought." Ellen understood. For years she had needed Clara to be the daughter who abandoned her. That version hurt, but it was simple. Now Clara was a woman who had been hurt, misled, proud, lonely, stubborn, and perhaps frightened too. Truth rarely made families cleaner. It made them more crowded. "You don't have to do anything today," Ellen said. Clara rubbed her hands together against the cold. "I came here thinking I'd stay 2 nights. Ellen kept her face still. "And then?" "I have a job waiting in Chicago, a real one. Bookkeeping for a furniture wholesaler. $22 a week to start." "That's good money." "Yes." "When do you have to be back?" "December 1st. 9 days. Ellen nodded. "You should take it." Clara looked hurt. Ellen recognized the mistake at once. Not because the advice was wrong, because it had come too quickly. She tried again. "I mean, if you want it." Clara looked down the wet street. "I don't know what I want." Ellen almost said, "Nobody does." Instead, she handed Clara one glove she had dropped inside the counter. "Then 9 days is 9 days." Clara put on the glove. "Mother?" "Yes?" "When I go back, I don't want money." Ellen felt the old instinct rise, defend, explain, insist. She let it pass. "All right. If you want to know how I am, ask me." Ellen looked at her daughter. "And if I don't answer?" Clara asked. "I'll ask again." For the first time, Clara reached for her, not an embrace. She took Ellen's hand, only for a few seconds. It was enough to make Ellen's throat ache. Back inside, Mabel was still sitting beside the untouched pie. She looked at their joined hands before they separated. "I suppose I'm in trouble," she said. "You are," Ellen answered. Mabel nodded. "Good, I was getting bored." Clara laughed. The pie was finally eaten. Over the next several days, Clara became part of Ward's lunch without anyone formally deciding she would. She woke early. She balanced the books. She learned that Mr. Reese always wanted coffee weak, and that George Harlan liked the end piece of bread toasted almost black. She learned that Ellen gave away more food than she admitted and charged men with steady pay 5 cents extra for stew, often enough to make up some of it. "You can't run books this way," Clara said. "I am running them. You are running a moral philosophy with soup. It has stayed open. Barely. Open is open." Clara shook her head. Then she designed a better system. They did not speak every hour about the past. That surprised Ellen. She had assumed reconciliation, if it ever came, would require endless confession. Instead, it arrived in small, practical moments. Clara mended an apron without being asked. Ellen learned that Clara hated canned peas now. They discovered both of them woke at 5, even on days they could sleep later. Clara showed Ellen how to stretch the business's cash by ordering flour twice monthly rather than once. Ellen showed Clara how to tell when a man wanted conversation and when he only wanted to eat in silence. George repaired the hinge. Then he found another reason to come back. The shelf above the sink sagged. Then the front shade cord broke. Then, according to George, the stovepipe looked suspicious. Clara watched all of this with criminal interest. Ellen refused to satisfy her. On the 5th evening, Clara said, "He likes you." Ellen was counting nickels. "He likes pie." He can like two things. Go add your columns. Clara smiled and did. The next morning, however, George came in without his toolbox. He carried an envelope. Ellen knew trouble by the way a man held paper. What is it? Lasker was at the bakery. Clara looked up from the ledger. Ellen's stomach tightened. What about him? He's closing his repair shop. Ellen stopped wiping the counter. Mr. Lasker owned the stove, refrigerator, pie case, and half the chairs. Ellen had been buying them from him slowly since opening Ward's lunch. George set the envelope down. He's moving to Youngstown with his son, wants his accounts settled before Christmas. Ellen did not touch the paper. How settled? All of it. Clara already knew the number, $68.40. To some people it was not a fortune. To Ellen it was 3 months of careful survival compressed into one demand. When? She asked. December 20th. George's voice was gentle. Ellen hated gentle voices around money. She opened the envelope. The note was polite. That made it worse. Lasker was not threatening her. He was not a banker taking a farm. He was another tired man trying to gather what was owed before starting over somewhere else. Ellen could not even enjoy blaming him. Clara took the note after she finished reading. We can figure this out. Ellen looked at her. We? Clara's face closed slightly. Ellen heard the word after it was too late. She had done it again. Turned help into a trespass before it could become a gift. George put on his cap. I'll be back for supper. Ellen nodded. After he left, Clara opened the ledger. There's $31 in the business account. $29 after the coal delivery. Fine, $29. I need at least $12 for next week's supplies. That leaves $17. I can count. So we need $51 by the 20th. Ellen crossed her arms. There is no we. Clara stared at her. Not because I don't want your help, Ellen said quickly. Because you're leaving December 1st. There. She had said it. The date had been sitting between them since the awning. Clara looked down. I haven't decided. You should. Mother. I mean for yourself. I know what you mean. Do you? Yes. For once, I do. They stood on opposite sides of the counter. Then Clara looked at the menu board. What sells best? Coffee. Food. Stew. What else? Pie when Mabel brings it. Can she bake more? She can bake until everyone in Summit County dies of pastry. Clara reached for a pencil. What are you doing? Thinking. That is dangerous. Clara ignored her. By noon, she had a plan Ellen disliked intensely, which was why it had a chance of working. Clara's plan began with the men who left the rubber plants before daylight. Ward's lunch opened at 6:30 because Ellen had always opened at 6:30. Clara asked why. Ellen said because 6:30 was morning. Clara said the men changing shifts at 5:40 apparently had not been informed. The next day they opened at 5:15. Ellen complained from the moment she lit the stove. At 5:23, 4 men came in. At 5:30, 3 more. By 6, every stool was occupied. Clara did not say, I told you so. She did not need to. Her face said it while she poured coffee. The second part of the plan was Mabel. Mabel agreed to supply 2 pies a day instead of 3 a week if Ellen paid for ingredients and gave her 1/3 of the pie receipts. Howard objected that his wife was turning into a commercial baker. Mabel told him that if he preferred, he could learn to bake. Howard did not mention it again. The third part was less comfortable. Clara made Ellen raise the price of the stew by a nickel. People won't pay it. They will if there's meat in it. There is meat in it. Then perhaps stop apologizing for charging for it. Ellen hated the sentence because it applied to more than stew. For 12 days they worked longer hours. Not impossible hours. Clara would not allow that. She closed the counter from 2 until 4 except on Fridays. Mr. Reese was informed that his coffee would be available at 4:05 instead of 3. He acted betrayed. Then he began coming at 4:05. Ellen discovered that not every kindness required a business to lose money. By the end of the first week, they had saved $7.80 more than usual. It was nowhere near enough, but it was real. Clara pinned a sheet of paper above the desk upstairs and wrote the amount at the end of each day. Ellen pretended not to look before bed. She always looked. On Sunday, Raymond Bell came to Ward's lunch. Ellen recognized him before he removed his hat. He was thinner, and his hair had gone almost completely white, but he still wore rimless spectacles. Clara was in the kitchen with Mabel. George occupied his usual stool. Raymond stopped inside the door and looked at Ellen for a long moment. Mrs. Ward. Ellen had become used to being called Ellen. The old title startled her. Mr. Bell. I hope I'm not intruding. You kept my husband's letter for 4 years. I think we've passed intrusion. George lowered his eyes into his coffee. Raymond nodded as though he deserved that. I should have sent it sooner. Yes. I promised him I wouldn't. Yes. And later I decided a promise to a man who would not keep his own no longer made much sense. Ellen studied him. That took you 4 years? 3 years and some months. Despite herself, Ellen smiled. Raymond did too. Clara came from the kitchen. She thanked him again for finding her. They gave him coffee and pie. For 20 minutes they spoke of ordinary things. The Hamilton had changed managers twice. The laundry where Ellen worked had newer presses. 2 women from her old shift still worked there. Raymond expected to retire soon, though he admitted he had been expecting that for 5 years. Then he reached into his coat. Ellen stiffened. No more letters. Raymond shook his head. Just this. He set a small receipt on the counter. It was dated December 1933, $3, paid to Raymond Bell. Everett Ward's signature ran along the bottom. Ellen stared. The money you loaned me for Clara's ticket, she said. Raymond nodded. He paid me back. When? That date. More than a year after Clara left. Why didn't you tell me? He asked me not to. Ellen gave him a look. Raymond raised both hands. I am beginning to understand that this family had too many private arrangements. Clara laughed. Even George smiled. Ellen turned the receipt over. Blank. It proved almost nothing, yet it mattered. Everett had paid a debt nobody expected him to pay. He had not told Ellen because perhaps repayment embarrassed him as much as borrowing. He had not told Clara because he had already allowed distance to become habit. The receipt did not absolve him. It did something more difficult. It returned him to human size. Ellen no longer had to carry either a monster or a misunderstood saint. She could remember a man who had loved his family, frightened them, failed them, worked when he could, borrowed what was not his, repaid part of it, regretted too late, and died without finishing the repair. That was heavier than hatred in some ways. It was also easier to set down. Raymond finished his pie. Before leaving, he glanced at George. You the repairman? George looked at Ellen. Ellen sighed. Apparently everyone in Akron knows my business. Only the interesting parts, George said. After Raymond left, Clara slipped the old receipt into the tobacco tin with the ticket stub. Ellen watched her. You can keep that if you want. The tin? All of it. Clara shook her head. No. Why? Because I didn't come for evidence to take away. She closed the tin. I came because I wanted to know whether my memory was the whole truth. And? It wasn't. Ellen nodded. Neither was mine. Thanksgiving came gray and cold. Ward's lunch closed at noon. Mabel insisted on dinner at her house. Ellen would have preferred to stay upstairs with a sandwich and her account book, but Clara had only 5 days left before Chicago, so they went. Howard had found a turkey through a cousin who raised birds outside town. It was smaller than the turkeys of better years, and Mabel stretched the meal with dressing, potatoes, turnips, and enough gravy to disguise anything that needed disguising. There were 11 people at the table. Family meals had always been dangerous because people who would never ask a direct question alone became courageous in groups. For the first half hour, everyone behaved. Then Cousin Irene asked Clara whether Chicago was a proper place for a woman alone. Clara said it depended on the woman. Irene did not take the warning. She asked whether Clara planned to marry. Clara said not before dessert. Howard coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh. Then Irene turned to Ellen. And you'll be alone again. There was pity in it. Ellen had learned that pity could humiliate more effectively than contempt. I'm alone most evenings now, she said. Yes, but after getting your girl back, well, it must be hard to let her run off again. The table quieted. Clara looked at Ellen. 4 years earlier, Ellen might have said something respectable. Clara has her own life. Young people must go where the work is. I'll be fine. All true. All designed to conceal the only truth that mattered. So Ellen put down her fork. It will be hard. Irene seemed disappointed by the simplicity. Ellen continued. I will miss her. Clara's eyes lowered. And I want her to go if going is what she wants. Irene smiled vaguely. Well, of course. No, Ellen said, not of course. I spent a great many years thinking love meant making yourself necessary enough that people could not leave. I was wrong. Across the table, Mabel became very still. Ellen had not meant to give a speech. She stopped before it became one. Irene reached for the potatoes. Then Howard, who rarely entered emotional territory without a map, cleared his throat. Clara's job sounds good. $22 a week, Mabel said proudly. Irene raised her eyebrows. That much? Clara nodded. And I can earn more once I'm settled. Irene looked impressed now. Money had always been able to make independence seem more respectable. Ellen disliked that, but she let it pass. Then Mabel said, she got her head for figures from Ellen. Ellen nearly choked. I did not. You ran that household on nothing for years. That is not bookkeeping. Clara looked at her mother. Apparently, it is a moral philosophy with soup. George had said something similar about machinery once. Ellen glanced at Clara, realized she was being teased, and laughed. The family table relaxed. No revelation was announced. Nobody stood to confess. That felt right. Some truths did not need a room full of witnesses. They only needed to stop being hidden. On Friday, Ellen went to see Mr. Lasker. Clara offered to come. Ellen said no. Clara did not argue. That was another kind of progress. Lasker's repair shop smelled of oil, hot metal, and old wood. Half the shelves were already bare. His son had come from Youngstown to help pack. Ellen carried her account book. She had $39 she could pay by December 20th if business continued as it had. Not 68. She told him so. Mr. Lasker rubbed his jaw. I can't carry accounts into Youngstown, Ellen. I know. I gave you 2 years. I know that too. If I take the equipment back, I can sell some of it. Yes. She had spent 3 nights thinking about those words. 2 years earlier, she would have heard them as catastrophe. Now she heard a problem with parts. The refrigerator, she said. What about it? Take it. He stared at her. It's worth more than the balance you can't pay. That old box? You told me it was worth $40 when you sold it to me. That was 2 years ago. And you told me it would outlive both of us. Lasker looked offended by his former optimism. Ellen opened her account book. If you credit me $28 for it, I can pay the rest in cash by the 20th. You need refrigeration. I need a business more. He considered. You'll buy ice every day? I've priced an icebox. Where? George Harlan knows a bakery replacing one. Lasker's mouth moved slightly. So Harlan is involved. He knows an icebox. Do not make a romance out of an appliance. Lasker laughed so loudly his son looked over from the back room. They settled at $26 credit for the refrigerator. Ellen paid what she could that day and signed a receipt for the rest. She walked back to Ward's lunch carrying the account book under her arm. The air smelled like snow. For the first time since Lasker's notice arrived, she did not feel rescued. She felt capable. There was a difference. Clara was waiting behind the counter. Well? He's taking the refrigerator. Clara looked alarmed. Ellen explained. By the end, Clara was smiling. You negotiated. I have purchased meat for 2 years. I know how to negotiate. I'm proud of you. Ellen busied herself with the coffee cups. At 48, she had not expected praise from her daughter to make her feel 8 years old. George is bringing the icebox Monday, Clara added. I have not agreed to that icebox. You just told Lasker you had. Ellen stared at her. Clara smiled innocently. Ellen pointed toward the kitchen. Go peel potatoes. The last argument came the night before Clara was supposed to leave. It began over a blouse. Most important family arguments began over something that was not important. Clara had washed a white blouse and hung it near the stove upstairs. Ellen told her it would scorch there. Clara said it was fine. Ellen moved it. Clara moved it back. Then Ellen said, "You should pack tonight." Clara froze. "I know when the bus leaves." "I didn't say you didn't. You've mentioned it 3 times. I don't want you rushing in the morning. I'm not 12. I know." "Do you?" Ellen looked at her. Clara pulled the blouse from the hanger. "You have been preparing for me to leave since the day I arrived." "That is not true. You keep telling everyone how good the Chicago job is. It is good. You keep saying $22 as though you're the one being hired. What would you like me to say?" "I don't know." "Then don't punish me for choosing wrong." Clara threw the blouse onto the bed. "I want you to want me here." Ellen stared at her. The room seemed suddenly too small for both of them. "I do." "No. You want me to visit. You want me to help with the books. You want to know I'm alive. But every time I talk about staying longer, you tell me to go." Ellen felt anger rise. Not at Clara, at the impossible expectation hidden inside love. 4 years ago, she had held too tightly. Now she was being accused of letting go too well. "What do you want from me?" "I want the truth." "I am giving you the truth." "Then say it without deciding what's best for me." Ellen stopped. That was the center of it. The old family habit had returned, wearing better clothes. She had told herself she was supporting Clara's freedom, but she had still been deciding, still arranging the emotional room so Clara would not have to see Ellen's need, still loving where she could not be seen. Ellen sat on the cot. Clara remained standing. "All right," Ellen said. She folded her hands. "The truth is, I want you to stay until Christmas." Clara's face changed. "I want you downstairs in the morning making fun of my accounts. I want to know what you think of Mr. Reese and whether George comes too often. I want to hear you moving around up here. I want to make you breakfast even though you can make your own." Clara's eyes filled. "And if you stay," Ellen continued, "I will begin to hope you stay longer. And if you stay longer, I will begin imagining you never leave. I know myself." Clara sat beside her. "So I keep telling you to go because I am trying very hard not to turn wanting you into a chain." For a moment, Clara did not speak. Then she said, "That is the first sensible thing you've said about me leaving." Ellen gave her a wounded look. Clara laughed through her tears. Ellen did too. Then Clara leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. The gesture was so familiar that Ellen almost could not bear it. Clara had done that at 7 when tired, at 14 when ill, at 19 after her first serious quarrel with Peter. Ellen sat very still. She did not reach immediately. Then she put one arm around her daughter. "I'm taking the job," Clara said. Ellen closed her eyes. "All right." "But I'm coming back for Christmas." Ellen opened them. "You don't have to." Clara lifted her head. Ellen sighed. "Sorry. You are very bad at this." "I've had 9 days of practice." Clara rested her head again. "I'm coming back for Christmas." "I'd like that." "Better." They sat together until the blouse near the stove became dangerously warm. The next morning, Clara packed. Not the way she had in 1932. There was no shouting downstairs, no suitcase torn between 2 people. No one counted hidden money. Ellen wrapped sandwiches in wax paper for the trip. Clara protested that the bus stopped for food. Ellen ignored her. Some maternal habits were worth keeping. Before they went downstairs, Clara opened the cupboard. She took out the sugar bowl. Ellen watched. "I thought you didn't want it." "I don't." Clara carried it down to the lunch counter. She moved the glass sugar dispenser aside and set the old bowl in its place. Ellen frowned. "What are you doing?" "Using it." "It doesn't have a lid." "Then don't put it outside overnight." "It's cracked." "So?" "It's been in a cupboard 4 years." Clara looked at her. "That seems long enough." Ellen ran a finger over the blue line. One side showed the old crack. The lower edge showed where Ellen had repaired it after throwing it against the wall. There was no way to make it look new. Clara filled it from the sugar sack. White grains covered the bottom, then rose toward the rim. Ellen watched until the repaired lines disappeared beneath the sugar. "No money in it," Clara said. Ellen smiled. "No money. No letters. No letters. No secrets." Ellen hesitated. "That may be ambitious." Clara laughed. Fine, fewer secrets. I can promise to try. George drove them to the bus station in the bakery truck. Ellen had objected because the cab smelled permanently of rye bread. Clara said there were worse ways to travel. At the station, people moved beneath a high ceiling carrying suitcases tied with belts, parcels wrapped in paper, babies, coats, newspapers, and the expressions of people who had learned that departure was ordinary. Ellen disliked stations. They made leaving look too organized. Clara checked her ticket. Her bus was called. Neither woman moved at first. George stepped several yards away and pretended to study a timetable. Ellen appreciated him for that. Clara took her mother's hands. "I'll write Sunday." Ellen nodded. "My address is on the card in your bag." "I know where you live." "It's the business address." "I know." "If you need," Clara raised one eyebrow. Ellen stopped. "If I want to know whether you need something, I'll ask." "Good. And if you don't answer, ask again." Ellen smiled. Clara hugged her. Not politely, not carefully, she held on. Ellen felt her daughter's cheek against her hair and realized she had forgotten the exact weight of Clara's arms. Memory kept faces better than touch. When Clara let go, Ellen wanted to pull her back. She did not. Not because she was being noble, because Clara had already promised to return. Trust, Ellen was discovering, required a woman to survive the space between a promise and its fulfillment. Clara boarded. She took a seat by the window. The bus pulled away slowly. She raised one gloved hand. Ellen raised hers. Then the bus turned and disappeared into traffic. Ellen stood beside George without speaking. After a while, he said, "Coffee?" She looked at him. "At my own counter? I was thinking somewhere you don't have to pour it." Ellen understood. For 2 years, George had eaten at her counter, repaired hinges, carried boxes, and found reasons to remain 5 minutes after closing. Ellen had allowed all of it because none of it required an answer. Now it did. She thought of Clara. She thought of the old habit of saying no before wanting could embarrass her. "Coffee," Ellen said. George smiled. "Good. Coffee is not a proposal." "I was hoping it was coffee." "Then we understand each other." They walked 2 blocks to a hotel coffee shop where Ellen had never eaten because paying someone else for coffee seemed ridiculous. George paid 10 cents for 2 cups. Ellen complained about the price. He said he had expected nothing less. It was not romance yet. That was one reason Ellen enjoyed it. December was cold. The old refrigerator left Ward's lunch on the 10th. George brought the bakery's used icebox the same afternoon. Ellen paid the bakery owner $6 for it, despite his offer to let her have it free. She had learned that accepting help did not require accepting every form of it. On December 20th, she counted out the final amount owed to Lasker, $29 in bills and coins. Some had come from longer breakfast hours, some from Mabel's pies, some from Ellen cutting 2 items from the menu that wasted more food than they earned. None came from Clara. That mattered to Ellen, though not because she refused her daughter's help. Clara had already given help. She had given knowledge. She had shown Ellen what the business looked like on paper. She had helped her see which hours paid and which habits merely felt kind. Help, Ellen now understood, did not have to leave one person indebted and the other powerful. Sometimes it simply changed what a person could see. Lasker wrote "paid" across the account. Ellen folded the receipt and placed it in the cash drawer. For half a second she considered hiding it in the sugar bowl. Then she laughed aloud. Mr. Reese looked up from his coffee. "What's funny?" "Nothing." "That's disappointing." She put the receipt in the account file where receipts belonged. Clara's first letter arrived the Monday after she left, not Sunday. Ellen spent Sunday pretending not to notice. Monday morning, the mailman handed her a cream envelope addressed in Clara's slanting hand. Ellen did not open it immediately. She placed it beside the register and served 6 breakfasts. Then George came in. "You're going to wear a hole in that envelope with your eyes," he said. Ellen opened it. Clara's job had begun well. The furniture wholesaler occupied 2 rooms above a warehouse. Her employer spoke too quickly. The adding machine stuck on 7. Her boarding room was warmer than the old one. She had bought a yellow curtain second-hand because the window faced a brick wall and needed optimism. Near the end, Clara wrote that she had almost sent money toward Lasker's account. Then she remembered their agreement. So instead, she asked a question. "Do you need anything?" Ellen read the line twice. Then she took out paper. She wrote that the refrigerator was gone, the icebox was working, and Lasker would be paid by the 20th. She told Clara that Ward's lunch needed exactly one thing: a reliable bookkeeper willing to inspect the accounts at Christmas. She almost added, "if it isn't too much trouble." She crossed those words out. "Come if you still want to," she wrote instead. "I want you here." She mailed the letter before she could improve it into something worse. Clara arrived on December 24. This time Ellen knew she was coming. There was no dramatic entrance, no rain, no mysterious envelope. The bell over the door rang at 4 in the afternoon while Ellen was ladling soup. Clara walked in carrying the same brown suitcase and a paper parcel tied with string. Ellen came around the counter. She hugged her daughter before Clara could put down the suitcase. 3 customers watched. Ellen did not care. Clara laughed against her shoulder. "That's new." "I'm practicing." "You're improving." Mabel arrived 10 minutes later with 2 pies and cried so loudly that Mr. Reese moved to the far stool. George came after his bread deliveries, carrying a small evergreen branch because he claimed a whole tree would violate the fire code. No one knew whether that was true. They hung the branch over the mirror. Christmas Eve supper at Ward's lunch was not planned as an event. It became one anyway. A few regulars had nowhere particular to go. Mabel and Howard stayed. George stayed. Raymond Bell appeared near 7 with a box of chocolates someone at the Hamilton had given him. They pulled the 2 small tables together and added counter stools around them. There was chicken instead of turkey, potatoes, canned green beans, pie, coffee, and enough conversation to make the narrow room feel larger. At one point, Ellen stood near the stove and looked around. For years, she had measured a home by who belonged there permanently: husband, child, furniture, a table with the same chairs every night. The Depression had taken most of those certainties from her. She had thought that meant home had been taken too. Now she saw Clara arguing with Mabel about pie crust. Howard was telling Raymond a story nobody else seemed to follow. George was drying plates because Ellen had forbidden him to repair anything on Christmas Eve. Mr. Reese was pretending he had stayed only because snow had begun outside. None of them belonged to the room in the old way. They could all leave. That no longer made their presence less real. Clara caught Ellen watching. "What?" "Nothing." Clara pointed a fork at her. "We are trying to eliminate that word." Ellen smiled. "I was thinking, I'm glad you came." Clara lowered the fork. "I'm glad too." After everyone left, mother and daughter cleaned the counter together. Snow pressed softly against the front window. Clara opened the ledger. "You paid Lasker." "I did." "And you put the receipt in the correct file?" "I am capable of growth." Clara looked impressed. Then she noticed the sugar bowl. It sat beside the coffee pot, half full. A customer had left the spoon standing crooked inside it. Clara lifted the bowl. The old repairs were still visible. "You're really using it?" "Every day." "Has anyone asked why it's cracked?" "Yes." "What do you say?" Ellen thought about that. At first she had said it was old. Then she had said she dropped it. Both answers were partly true. But one morning George had asked, and Ellen surprised herself. She told him it broke during a family argument and she repaired it badly. George had looked at the bowl and said bad repairs that held were still repairs. Ellen had called that the sort of thing a man said when he wanted credit for fixing hinges. But she remembered it. "I say it broke twice," Ellen told Clara. "And?" "And I kept it." Clara waited. "That's all?" "That's enough for people buying coffee." Clara smiled. She replaced the bowl. In January, she returned to Chicago again. This departure hurt too. Ellen was beginning to understand that healthy love did not eliminate pain. It only changed what the pain meant. Clara wrote most Sundays, sometimes Wednesday, once not for 2 weeks. Ellen wrote and asked if she was all right. When no answer came after 5 days, she wrote again. She did not ask Mabel to investigate. She did not send money through anyone else. She did not imagine a tragedy because a letter was late. At least not for more than an hour at a time. Clara finally replied that work had been busy and apologized. Ellen wrote back that apologies were accepted, but silence was expensive because stamps cost 3 cents and she had now used 2. Clara sent 6 cents taped inside the next letter. Ellen laughed so hard George asked what happened. She showed him. By spring, Ward's lunch had 8 stools instead of 6. Ellen bought the 2 new ones herself, not matching. One had a red seat, the other green. Clara called them ugly. Ellen agreed. They were paid for. That made them beautiful enough. George still came 3 evenings a week, sometimes 4. In March, he asked Ellen to attend a picture show with him. She said yes before explaining why it was impractical. They sat through a comedy Ellen barely remembered because she was too aware of another person beside her. Afterward, they walked back toward Market Street. George did not ask what they were becoming. Ellen was grateful. At 48, she had discovered that not every relationship needed its future decided before it was allowed a present. In April, Clara came for a weekend. She looked healthier than she had in November. Not richer, not transformed, simply more settled inside her own life. On Saturday morning, she took over the cash drawer while Ellen cooked. A woman Ellen did not know came in with 2 children. The younger child pointed to the cracked sugar bowl. "Why's that broken?" he asked. His mother shushed him. Ellen turned from the stove. "It isn't broken," she said. Clara looked at her. The boy frowned at the visible seam. "It has cracks." "That it does." "Then it's broken." Ellen considered. Children had no patience for sentimental distinctions. "It was broken," she said. "Now it holds sugar." The boy accepted this immediately. His mother spooned sugar into her coffee. The conversation moved on. Clara waited until they were gone. "That was almost poetic." "Don't insult me." "I mean it. I sell breakfast." Clara touched the bowl lightly. For years, Ellen had kept it because throwing it away felt like admitting that one terrible night had been final. Then she kept it because it was evidence of what she had endured. Then Clara returned, and the bowl became evidence that neither woman had remembered the whole story. Now it was becoming something less dramatic, a dish, useful, ordinary. Perhaps that was the final change. Not everything that carried pain had to remain a shrine to pain. That afternoon, Ellen and Clara walked past the old house on Cross Street. Someone else lived there now. Blue curtains hung in the front windows. A tricycle lay on its side near the steps. The porch rail Everett had meant to repair for years had finally been replaced. Clara stopped across the street. Ellen did too. For a while, neither spoke. "I thought I would feel something bigger," Clara said. "What do you feel?" "I don't know. Smaller, maybe." Ellen understood. The house had dominated too many memories. In person, it was only a house. A family had lived there. A family had hurt there. A family had also eaten Sunday breakfast, dried mittens by the stove, laughed over card games, nursed influenza, celebrated birthdays, and once painted the kitchen a yellow Everett hated because Clara and Ellen liked it. The worst night had not been the only night. That mattered too. Clara looked toward the upstairs window that had been hers. "Do you miss him?" Ellen knew who she meant. "Yes." Clara seemed surprised. "So do I," she said. They did not explain themselves. There was nothing disloyal in missing a flawed man. There was nothing forgiving in remembering the good. The dead did not need to be reduced for the living to become free. They walked on. At the corner, Clara slipped her arm through Ellen's. Ellen looked at her daughter's hand on her sleeve. She thought of August 1932, when she had believed there were only 2 choices, hold Clara or lose her. It had taken 4 years to learn there was a third. Let her go and remain someone she could return to. By the time they reached Ward's lunch, George was waiting outside with a box of bread under one arm. He looked at Clara. "You staying long?" "Until Monday." "Good. Your mother charges me extra when you're not here." "I do not." "You raised the stew." "Everyone pays that." "Exactly. Terrible favoritism." Clara laughed and unlocked the door. Ellen followed. Morning light reached through the front window and struck the white sugar bowl on the counter. The crack along its side showed clearly. So did the blue line. Inside was enough sugar for the breakfast rush. Nothing else. No hidden wages. No train money. No letters waiting for the courage to be read. Ellen picked up the spoon and set it straight. Then she opened the door for the day.